When kids wake up in the 5 a.m. hour, it can be one of the most frustrating sleep challenges to solve. On the one hand, the kid's been asleep for a while, so the parent's thinking, okay, well, maybe they're just like an early bird. But on the other hand, it's freaking 5 a.m., and that seems really early. Well, after working with toddler families for over 8 years, I have found that there are 3 keys to prevent these 5 a.m. wake-ups, and it's easier than you might think. Stick with me till the end. I hear some variation of this question from tired families almost on a daily basis. My 3-year-old is waking up at 4 or 5 in the morning. We've tried early bedtimes, late bedtimes. We've tried everything. Not to worry, there are 3 things that you can do to prevent your kid from waking up so darn early. Number 1, make intentional changes. So solving this problem of early wake-ups can take some trial and error, so you need to tackle it intentionally. So this is a big mistake a lot of families make, which is they try too many things at once, so they can never really tell what's actually making a difference. Desperate to stop these early wake-ups, parents will try to change bedtime to see if that will help. So they might move bedtime like really late one night in hopes that their kid sleeps in the morning. And then the next night, when that didn't work, they put them to bed like really early because they heard that you're supposed to do that. So bedtime is bouncing around, but the child is still getting up early, and then the parent kind of feels helpless, like, well, I've tried everything, like nothing's working. But in order to get control and really solve this problem of the early wake-ups, you need a real plan, a real intentional plan for bedtime. And this is so important. In fact, having the right sleep schedule is the cornerstone of my REST method. It's the letter R. It stands for right sleep schedule. And this is one of the 4 pieces that I teach inside of my sleep course, Sleep Tight Without a Fight. But I'm going to give you a few tips for bedtime today. So the underlying cause of why kids wake up early is because they're not getting enough sleep. Now, I know that that sounds really counterintuitive. Okay, well, if they are so tired, why don't they just sleep more? Well, it just doesn't work like that. We say it's not logical, it's biological. When kids are chronically not getting enough sleep, it actually does cause them to wake up early. It can cause them to wake up in the middle of the night too. So the first thing we need to look at is how to get them more sleep in their day. So in order to get more sleep into a child's day, the best time to do that is at bedtime, which means moving bedtime earlier, not later. This is a mistake that so many parents make. You don't move bedtime later. If you do that, it's just going to make the problem worse because the child's going to get even less and less sleep, and that's going to cause them to be more overtired. So part of the solution is going to be moving bedtime earlier. But how early? All right, let's start with like our general rule. So kids under 6 years old should ideally be asleep by 8 p.m., which means that you should have a bedtime routine that ends like around 7:45 to give them a little bit of time to fall asleep. So this is where I want you to become really intentional with bedtime. So I want you to determine a new trial bedtime, and I want you to stick with it for 5 days. So if your child's going to bed after 8 o'clock, then you want to go ahead and move it to 7:45 to get started. Let's say your child's already going to bed like at 7:30 or 7:45, but they still are waking up early, then I want you to move it 15 minutes earlier. This is going to be your first trial bedtime. Then I want you to stick with that bedtime for 5 days. See, this is what a lot of people don't do. They think like in 1 or 2 nights, if it's not fixed, then it's not the right bedtime. But I want you to stick with this new trial bedtime for 5 nights because it can take some time for this new early bedtime to like quote unquote work. Basically for this new extra sleep that your kid is getting to compound and help to prevent these early wake-ups. So you got to give it 5 nights. You got to give it a chance to work. And I want you to keep a sleep log, okay? I want you to write down what time your child falls asleep and then what time they wake up while you're doing this trial bedtime period, right? And it's really important that you write this down because I promise you, you're not going to remember what happened 2 nights ago. And we've got to do some trial and error. So we need to write this down so we can actually see if we're seeing some small improvements. And that's what we're looking for, a small improvement. That could look like your kid falling asleep a little bit quicker at bedtime and of course sleeping a little bit later in the morning. Now, when you start to see some of these small improvements, you know that you're onto something. You know that you've got a really good bedtime, so stick with it. Let's say after 5 days, you're keeping your sleep log and you're not really seeing any changes. You're not seeing your kid fall asleep faster. You're not seeing them sleep a little bit later in the morning. Then at that point, after 5 days, I want you to move bedtime 15 minutes earlier and then stick with that new bedtime for 5 days. When you do this intentionally and you keep the sleep log so that you're really monitoring your progress, you'll be able to find the perfect bedtime that has your child waking up at a more humane hour, like sometime after 6 o'clock in the morning. But you've got a couple other things to look at too. All right, number 2, what's so great that's happening at 5 in the morning? So I want you to take a look at the morning from your child's perspective. So what happens when they're waking up early at 5:30 in the morning? Do they get to climb in bed with you for some snuggle time until it's time to get up? Or do you give them an iPad to, just keep them quiet for a little while? Do you give them a snack? I mean, I get it. It's early. You probably want to just get a few more minutes of shut-eye for yourself, or maybe you're trying to get ready for work or whatever. But you need to kind of look at what, quote unquote, benefit your child might be getting from waking up so early, because that could really be shooting you in the foot. Now, you may be telling your child, stop getting up so early. It's not time to get up. You need to stay in bed longer till mommy comes to get you. You may be saying all of these things, but your child's experience is what I want you to look at, because they may be getting something pretty cool when they're waking up early. So what you want to do is you really want to try to keep the morning boring. Encourage them to stay in their room until it's time to get up. Number 3, use a color-changing toddler clock. Now, I'd say that most families have probably invested in a toddler clock, but most of them say that they don't, quote unquote, work. Meaning, like, they say to the child, okay, don't come out of your room until the light turns green, but the child just doesn't listen to it. But here's the thing. It's actually the parent's job to teach the child how to actually listen to the clock and wait for the green light to come out of their room. But most of the time, parents just try to use words to explain this, and just using words to explain it usually isn't enough for a child. They really need to have an experience so they can start to understand how to listen to the clock. When you're telling your child, the day doesn't start until the light turns green, but your kid's waking up at 5 and then getting to jump into your bed and watch an iPad until 6:30, well, yeah, the green light doesn't mean anything. That's not their experience. So as the parent, you have to give the toddler clock the power. So you do this by pairing your child's experience of waking up and coming out of their room with the light being green. So each morning when your child wakes up and it's time for them to come out of their room, I want you to go into their room and say, look, the light's green, it's time to get up. Now, to encourage them to listen to the clock, you may have to fudge this early on, especially if you have an early riser. So what I mean by this is you may have to change the light to green earlier than you actually want it to be. So let's say your light is set to turn green at 6:30, but your kid's waking up at 5:30, so they never even see the green light because they're already out of their room by then. What you can do, if you have the Hatch toddler clock, you can use the app on your phone to turn the light green. So if you hear your kids stirring at 5:30, you can go ahead and turn the light to green, go in there, even though it's 5:30 and it's earlier than you want, you can go in there and say, oh, look, the light's green, it's time to get up. You're pairing the experience of them waking up with the light being green. That's how your kid starts to listen to the clock and understand the rules, by having that experience. And you may have to fudge that a little bit when they're waking up early, but that's okay. It's temporary and they don't know what time it is anyway. Now, when you get your kid listening to the clock and you start making the mornings really boring and you find the right bedtime, this is what's going to help your child start to naturally sleep later in the morning. We went through a few pieces of the letter R, the right sleep schedule. But if you want to learn all 4 pieces of my rest method, then join me in my next Toddler Sleep Masterclass. It's a totally free class, but all you have to do is reserve your spot. And you can do that at toddlersleepmasterclass.com.